Thank you for the introduction. I encountered Walker Percy through a friend who was studying Walker Percy with a professor at the University of Maryland. And she recommended that I read one of his books. That was back in 1987. She recommended I read Love in the Ruins. I read it and I absolutely loved it. I thought it was an absolutely brilliant book. It was satirical, funny. It had a kind of intriguing philosophical depth amidst a lot of zany satire. That began for me a sustained Walker Percy reading binge. I didn't stop until I had read everything. I read all of his novels, all of his essays, all of his interviews. I became, I think, something of a problem for my friends in Washington. I mean, Carlo and several friends of mine, they remembered me to this day as the one who talked so much about Walker Percy. So much so when Percy died in 1990, there was a front page Washington Post story about him. I got 3 calls from old friends saying, are you okay? We got the news on it. Are you all right? I was all right. I was touching that they called. I went to New Orleans in 1989. My brother Jimmy lived down there, and I went to visit him. And while I was there, I told him I want to go visit Walker Percy. He said, who's that? I said, it's this writer that I love. He lives in Covington, right across the Lake Pontchartrain. And we'll go over there and we'll see him. He goes, you're crazy. You're going to drop in on him? I said, I really want to do that. And so we went over there, and we drove across over the causeway there to Covington. I got there, and I knew enough to figure out where I could find him because I'd read things about him. And I got cold feet, and I couldn't do it. I got there, and I chickened out. And I bought him lunch. We drove back to New Orleans. And for 20 years, I've heard insulting jokes from family members about which writer are you going to visit this year. But it raises a question to me, and that is, what is it really that prompted me to do that? You know, why, of all the people I've read over the years, why did I want so much to go over there and to meet him? And what was it that fascinated me so much about his writing? What was it that gripped me? And I thought that if I could give an answer to that, that would be a useful contribution to our evening. So I want to attempt to do briefly, as Rita instructed me, is just to say a little bit about what it is that moved me so much. And I'm going to begin with an aspect that might not appear to be something deep, but actually it really is. For a man who suffered a great deal in his life, Walker Percy was very funny. To go back to his suffering, he had a dreadful life. His father committed suicide when he was 13. His grandfather had committed suicide just after Walker Percy was born. His mother drove into a creek and died in an accident that Walker Percy himself believed was probably a suicide. He suffered from the same depression that led to the death of his grandfather and his father. Not long after he became a medical doctor, he contracted tuberculosis and had to lay on his back for a year and a half. That was the period when his kind of writing career began. And yet he has a brilliant sense of humor. I'm going to read a short passage here from my very favorite book. This is Love in the Ruins. I'll give you just a little bit of context for those who might not have read it. It's an apocalyptic novel. Everything is falling apart. The buildings are crumbling, vines are appearing. All of the race problems of America have erupted in violence. There's this dreadful ideological polarization in every institution. Everything is falling apart. And in the midst of that, we have our hero, Tom Moore, who's a crackpot physician who's invented a device called a lapsometer. What the lapsometer does, in philosophical terms, it measures the distance between your ontological self and your existential condition. To put it in simpler terms, it measures exactly how screwed up you are. The only problem is he can't really do anything about it. It's simply a diagnostic tool, so he can measure exactly where in your brain these psychological problems are evident, but he can't really help anybody. He can't help himself. He put the device over his own head and said that it was like dragging a metal detector over the sand in Iwo Jima. It didn't do any good. So anyway, there he is, though, in this apocalyptic novel. At a certain moment, he's on the cloverleaf of a highway. He has a rifle in his hand. He's watching smoke in the distance, and his eyes are swelling up because he drinks very heavily, and he can't let off of gin fizzes. And he's allergic to a substance in the gin fizz. So he's swelling up, losing his vision. And these are his reflections as he sits there on the highway. The poor USA. Even now, late as it is, nobody can really believe that it didn't work after all. The USA didn't work. Is it even possible that from the beginning it never did work? That the thing always had a flaw in it? A place where it would shear? And that all this time we were not really different from Ecuador and Bosnia-Herzegovina, just richer? Moon Mullins blames it on the Negroes. Was it that business from the beginning? What a bad joke. God saying, here it is, the new Eden, and it is yours because you're the apple of my eye, because you're the lordly Westerners, the fierce Caucasian Gentile Visigoths. Believed in me and in the outlandish Jewish event, even though you were nowhere near it, and had to hear the news of it from strangers. But you believed, and so I gave it to you, gave you Israel and Greece and science and art, and the lordship of the earth, and finally even gave you the new world that I blessed for you. And all you had to do was pass one little test, which was surely child's play for you because you had already passed the big one. One little test. Here's a helpless man in Africa. All you have to do is not violate it. That's all. One little test. You flunk. No, not fair. The test was too much. What do you expect of a man? Yet even so, we almost passed. There was a time. You tested us because bad as we were, there was no one else, and everyone knew it. Even our enemies, and that is why they curse us. Who curses the Chinese? Whoever imagined the Chinese were blessed by God and asked to save the world? Whoever expected anything else from them than what they did? What a laugh. And as for Russia and the Russian Christ who was going to save Europe from itself, ha, ha, flunked, Christendom down the drain, the dream over, back to history in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So here we have this wacky satirical humor that fills the book. But Percy, even his humor, I think, as you can see in this, has a serious dimension. And Percy was, I would say, a deeply serious man. And I would say that in the noblest sense of the term. He was really, I would say, defined by a quest for the truth. It's what most ennobled him, and I think it's what, in his, the protagonists of his novels, as wacky as they are, like Tom Moore, and all their foibles and all their faults, they're all defined by a quest for the truth. And to me, this is, as I try to identify those things that move me the most in him and in his writing, this is something quite powerful. The documentary that we'll see begins with a passage that I was going to quote, but they stole it from me. It's from The Moviegoer, and the Binks Bowling is this young man kind of lost in this kind of the new suburban South, and he announces, no one can quite understand why he's so out of place, why he's so different, but he announces this quest for meaning. Tom Moore, the one I mentioned, is this, and Love in the Ruins, and The Last Gentleman. No, I'm sorry, and The Denver Syndrome. He has this quest to kind of heal man's deepest wounds through science. And then one also a passage that I love, and I'm going to read it as another example of this, is from The Second Coming. In The Second Coming, the protagonist is named Will Barrett. He's a successful Southerner, as all Percy's characters are. But he comes up to New York, he makes a lot of money, and he goes back to North Carolina, and he's prosperous, and he's wealthy, and he's living in a privileged suburban community where he plays golf. He's this champion amateur golfer. But he can't come to terms with something, and here Percy's bringing in autobiographical details. He can't come to terms with the suicide of his father. And there are these very marvelous, powerful scenes where he's in this kind of luxurious golf club, and his ball goes into the woods, and all of a sudden, as he leaves this well-manicured golf fairway, and goes into the woods, all of a sudden, mentally, he's back in the South of his boyhood, and he's back on this hunting trip where his father, kind of going through in his mind the events that led to his father's suicide, and he's desperately trying to find meaning in this, and he can't do it. Very powerful scenes. It's a much more serious novel than Love in the Ruins. But at a certain moment, he has this outrageous idea. He has this outrageous idea that he's going to settle everything. That there's one thing that needs more than anything else. And here is where another aspect where Percy, to me, is very interesting, because he never stopped at the sense that my suffering is ultimately my suffering, that the difficulties of my life are ultimately personal pains characteristic of only me. He had a depth and a wisdom to say that if there's an answer to suffering, there's an answer to the suffering of the human heart. That kind of ache that's deeper than my particular aches. And his character has this wisdom too, although in another way he's lacking. Will Barrett decides that he needs to find meaning. He needs to find a meaning to his existence if he's going to continue with the suffering of his life. He's going to have a showdown with God. He goes into a cave, and he's going to perform the greatest experiment that a human being has ever performed. He's going to stay there and demand a sign from God, or he's going to die. He's communicated with a friend about this whole thing, and he's going to report it. And he's finally going to settle the question. And I'll read this passage where he embarks on this grand experiment. My project is the first scientific experiment in history to settle once and for all the question of God's existence. As things presently stand, there may be signs of existence, but they point both ways, and are therefore ambiguous, and so prove nothing. For example, the wonders of the universe do not convince those most conversant with the wonders, the scientists themselves. Whether or not this testifies to the stupidity of scientists, or to God's success in concealing himself, doesn't matter. But what if one should devise a situation in which one's death would occur if and only if God did not manifest himself, did not give a sign clearly and unambiguously once and for all? Would not the outcome of such an experiment be a clear yes or a clear no with no maybes? Unless I'm mistaken, I've hit on the perfect, the definitive experiment, as definitive as the famous Michelson-Morley experiment, which asked a question about the nature of space which could only be answered by a yes or a no. No maybes allowed. We've had 5,000 years of maybes, and this is enough. Can you discover a single flaw in this logic? I've got it. No more tricks. No more deus absconditus. Come out, wherever you are. The game is over. My experiment is simply this. I shall go to a desert place and wait for God to give a sign. If no sign is forthcoming, I shall die. But people will know why I died, because there is no sign. The cause of my death will be either his non-existence or his refusal to manifest himself, which comes to the same thing as far as we are concerned. Only you know the nature of the experiment. I give you permission to publish the results in a scientific journal of your choice. Will it not be a relief to all of mankind to have this dreary question settled once and for all? Proved or disproved? Imagine. We shall no longer have to listen to preachers haranguing unbelievers about God's existence and professors haranguing people about God's non-existence and mythic structures. Okay, so then he concocts this outrageous idea. He's going to go into the cave and he's going to have this showdown with God. And then I'm going to read you what God's response, or how it all panned out. This is both, I think, a good example of his humor and his depth. Unfortunately for the poor man awaiting the last days and raving away at God and man in the bowels of Solwood Mountain, directly below thousands of normal folk playing golf and antiquing and barbecuing, and simply enjoying the fall colors. For on the following day, at the height of his lunacy, the cloud blew away, and the beautiful days of Indian summer began. The mountains glowed like rubies and amethyst, and leafers were out in force. Unfortunately, things can go wrong with an experiment most carefully designed by a sane scientist. A clear yes or no answer may not be forthcoming after all. The answer may be a muddy maybe. In the case of Will Barrett, what went wrong could hardly be traced to God or man, the story of the Jews, or whomever, but rather to a cause at once humiliating and comical, a toothache. So in the end, not only did he not get a clear answer to his peculiar question, not a yes or no, or even a maybe, he could not even ask the question. How does one ask a question, either a profound question or a lunatic question, with such a pain in an upper canine that every heartbeat feels like a hot ice pick shoved straight up into the brain? The toothache was so bad it made him sick. He vomited. There is one such cure for cosmic explorations, grandiose ideas about God, man, death, suicide, and such, and that is nausea. I defy a man afflicted with nausea to give a single thought to these vast subjects. A nauseated man is a sober man. A nauseated man is a disinterested man. So anyway, I thought this was funny, but I also think it's brilliant, and a lot of what I love about Percy is in it. Because there's something noble about Will Barrett. He wants to know what life is about, and he wants an answer for his suffering, and there's something confused in it. And I think in this example we see one of Percy's big preoccupations. He was a scientist who loved science. He was a medical doctor, and as a young man he was defined mostly by two things really: stoicism and science. This film does a nice job of presenting the stoic aspect, and these are the things that he really took to for me. Will Barrett really has no recourse other than to say if he's looking for universal truth, he has to use the scientific method. Of course, it's the wrong method. The scientific method can give you so much about the material world. There's two things it doesn't help you with at all, and that's God and the self. And this is what he was looking for. And I mean, this is a very Walker Percy thematic concern that comes up in the example. And also, I would say one thing that moves me a lot in this passage is the courage with which Percy confronted his own experience, which filled that novel in particular. But for me, people are drawn to writers for different reasons. And I would say that for Percy, he's not a writer like some who invented a new kind of language or a new way of telling a story. It wasn't really, I really wasn't drawn to him because of kind of literary accomplishment. I was really mostly drawn to him because he had a particular talent, a particular way to really make me reflect on my humanity. I mean, he really had a sense that that's one of the strangest things in the whole cosmos is the human person. And it's a real thing. And I think this is the thing he conveys so vividly, so dramatically in his writing, that the human person is a phenomenon in the material world. And it's the strangest thing there is. He has a wonderful line in Lost in the Cosmos where he says, "Why is it that of all the billions and billions of strange objects in the cosmos, novas, quasars, pulsars, black holes, you are beyond doubt the strangest?" And he had a way of making this vivid in a way that at times was, I would say, almost unsettling and disturbing, but in the end something that was true. That somehow, this kind of open-ended humanity that is you and me is quite a mysterious thing that is kind of calling out for an answer. And the way that he kind of made that question so vivid and so strong was something extremely provocative to me in his knowledge. All of his protagonists are odd in the world that they live in, but he makes it abundantly clear that it's because they understand this truth, even though they're all lopsided, crazy people. They understand that somehow this drama of discovering yourself and entering the world and placing it is a real drama, and that all the conventions that society puts in front of us aren't necessarily helpful in this very human quest. For Percy, all ideologies, religions reduced to ideology, and all sentimentalities fare very badly. But I would say, now, if I were to stop there and say those are the things that move me, I'd be missing something important because, I mean, you can say many of the existentialist writers that Walker Percy loved and grew from and was inspired by would lead you to a similar place. Percy was also a Christian apologist, and an unusual one. And I would say of the two writers in my life that have really influenced me and led me to really affirm the religious tradition I was raised in, the Catholic Church, were Percy and the man that I see that you have lined up for the next time, which is Luigi Giussani. And I really value this dimension of his writing. And it was two ways. One was not so common. He did write some kind of overt Christian apologetics. He was an essayist. In fact, he was an essayist before he was a novelist. He wrote a lot of very interesting essays. Mostly about language and this kind of scientific bent. And then about the South and about contemporary issues. But some of them were Christian apologetics. One in particular, I'm not going to take the time to go into because I don't want to take too long. I'd recommend it to you, and that's The Message in the Bottle, which is, I thought, a brilliant essay. They really employed this metaphor of castaways, one another. There's a lot in it, but there's one thing that really struck me a lot that to me is worthwhile for you to go and read it. He said that using his allegory of castaways, said they're always seeking the truth that they need, but unfortunately, so there are three kinds of truth. One is those things that pertain to their existence on the island. The second would be those things that could be proven anywhere, i.e. scientific knowledge. But he said there's a third kind of truth that they need, but they have to understand they have a predicament of being a castaway, because that's the message that addresses that very problem, that you are castaways, that you don't belong here ultimately. This is news that pertains to this predicament. And he was saying that so much of what he does in his writing is in a way to remind people that you are a human self. There is a predicament, and that I think this Christian apologetics work mostly that way. To say that if you observe your humanity seriously, at this level he was a pure scientific man in the sense that he had this cool, calm observation of the human self and the human phenomenon. And his kind of wager was if you observe the human self attentively, what you observe is calling out for something else. What you observe is is a being that is in relation to another. I'm going to conclude my part of the evening with an odd passage, which I value a lot, because to me this is the way, when I say that, his writing really did have a strong influence on me, and in this way in particular, it's really leading me to affirm my Catholic tradition. This is the way it works, and as you see, there's no overt Christian apologetics. Kind of, in a way, works in a different way. He kind of calls your attention to, I would say, human dynamics, but in a way that raises a powerful question. This thing will make little sense if it will help you a little bit, because it's written. These are the words of a character she is escaped from a mental institution. She has no memory. And she's trying to, like all these characters in so many ways, she's trying to kind of place herself back into the world. When she had her mental breakdown, she kept using these words that she was a serious star that was having a nova that was kind of imploding. She was going deeper and deeper and deeper, trying to find some sense of self that would save her in that crisis. And now, at a different point in the novel, she's kind of she's taking care of the owl-brained Will Barrett, who was stumbled out of the mountain with his toothache. But this is a passage of her thoughts and her reflections, and in it there's just one part of it that I think has a very important kernel of what Percy is saying about ourselves. Is one supposed to do such and such with another person in order to be happy? Must one have a plan for the pursuit of happiness? If so, is there a place where one looks up what one is supposed to do? Or is there perhaps an agency which one consults? Who says? Who is doing the supposing? Why not live alone if it is people who bother me? Why not live in a world of books and brooks but no looks? Going home one evening, she passed Hattie's red barn. Young folk were dancing and drinking and joking. Couples came and went to vans. Someone beckoned to her from the doorway. She did not belong with them. Why not? They were her age. They weren't making merry, weren't they? And she would like to make merry, wouldn't she? They were good sorts, weren't they? Yes, but not good enough. Perhaps she had not sunk deep enough into her serious self. If one sinks deep enough, there is surely company waiting. Otherwise, if one does not have a home and has not sunk into self and seeks company, the company is lonesome. Silence takes root, sprouts, looks dart. On the other hand, look what happens to home if one is too long at home. Rather than go home to Williamsport, she'd rather live in a stump hole, even though her parents' home was not only registered with the National Registry, but restored and written up in Southern Living. Rather than marry and have a life like her mother, she'd rather join the Navy and see the world. Why is a home the best place and also the worst? How can the best place become the worst place? What is a home? A home is a place, any building, where one sinks into one's self and finds company waiting. Company? Whose company? Oneself? Somebody else? That's the problem. The problem is not the house. People are the problem. But it was their problem. She could wait. Now that's a bit mysterious probably, but I read that passage, it struck me a great deal, and this is the reason why, because I think this is what Percy ultimately proposes. In all of his work, all of his essays, all of his novels, he patiently, persistently portrays the drama of being a self in this world that doesn't recognize what it is. And I think subtly, he after making this so dramatically clear, he makes this proposal, that in the end you want to understand what a self is. You don't go deeper and deeper and deeper into yourself and find some nuclear core at the center. When you go deep into yourself, this mysterious, wonderful self, what you find ultimately is company waiting. That at the very bottom of us is another, is relationship to another. That the truth of me is a relationship with him. And that I'm never going to be understood as a scientific object, as something to fit for experimental study. And to me, this was what was powerful in this work. That having made so clear the human drama, all of a sudden the religious question wasn't a matter of affirming religious principles. It was a matter of making sense of existence. I get a particular gift, I think, for making that clear. That was very important for me. So anyway, those are my attempts to communicate why for me, Walker Percy was an important writer. There's much, much more that could be said. This film is very useful for taking care of that. Did you want to say a word about the film? Or?
No.
Okay. Do you want me to say a word about the film?
Yes, sure, if you want to, yeah.
Well, I don't know anything more about the film than having watched it once, but it's a very, very nice job. They have it's primarily people who, friends who lived with him in Covington, family members, and then a whole series of scholars and biographers. But between these different interviews and these different pieces, they do a very good job of both giving you some sense of his life, his work, and kind of his central thematic concerns. I think you'll enjoy it.